For almost of all of human history, life changed so slowly that a person could die in nearly the same world they were born into. Then, within just a few generations, everything accelerated. Machines replaced muscles, factories replaced workshops, cities exploded in size. Travel shrank from months to days. Production increased on a scale humanity had never imagined. The Industrial Revolution didn't simply invent new machines, it reinvented civilization. Almost every aspect of modern life, from the electricity powering your home to the smartphone in your pocket, can trace part of its story back to a revolution that began more than 250 years ago. But why did it begin when it did? Why did it begin in Britain rather than China, India, or the Middle East, which had once been technological leaders? And why do historians consider the Industrial Revolution one of the most important turning points in all of human history? The answers reveal how one transformation reshaped not just economies, but the very way human beings live, work, think, and build the future.
For thousands of years, human civilization advanced, but slowly. Agriculture allowed permanent settlements. The Bronze Age introduced stronger tools. The Iron Age expanded military and agricultural capabilities. The Renaissance accelerated learning. The scientific revolution transformed humanity's understanding of nature. Yet, despite these remarkable achievements, daily life for most people remained surprisingly familiar. A farmer in 17th century Europe still relied primarily on human labor, animal power, wind, or flowing water. Production happened in homes or small workshops. Transportation depended on horses and sailing ships. Manufacturing remained limited by the physical strength of workers. Economic growth existed, but it was constrained by one unavoidable fact. Human and animal muscles could produce only so much energy. For centuries, civilizations had improved tools. What they had not fundamentally changed was the source of power itself. That limitation defined nearly all pre-industrial economies. By the 18th century, however, several long-term developments began converging. Europe had experienced centuries of commercial expansion. Global trade connected continents. Scientific inquiry increasingly emphasized experimentation and practical application. Financial institutions became more sophisticated. Property rights strengthened in many regions. Agricultural improvements increased food production, allowing populations to grow. Britain occupied a particularly unusual position within this changing world. It possessed abundant coal reserves located relatively close to navigable waterways. Its expanding colonial and commercial networks provided access to overseas markets and raw materials. Political institutions, while far from perfect, generally offered greater protection for private investment than many contemporary rivals. Universities, engineers, entrepreneurs, merchants, and skilled craftsmen increasingly interacted within an environment that rewarded practical innovation. No single factor explains why industrialization began in Britain. Rather, historians describe it as the product of multiple reinforcing conditions: geography, natural resources, capital, scientific culture, commercial expansion, political stability, agricultural productivity, and perhaps most importantly, a growing willingness to solve problems through technology. The stage was set. Humanity had accumulated centuries of knowledge. Now it was about to discover an entirely new way to use energy.
The Industrial Revolution did not begin with electricity. It began with steam. For centuries, miners faced a persistent problem. As coal mines became deeper, groundwater flooded tunnels faster than workers could remove it. Coal itself was becoming increasingly valuable, but extracting more of it required solving the flooding problem. Early steam-powered pumping machines appeared in the early 18th century, most notably those developed by Thomas Newcomen. Although revolutionary, these engines consumed enormous amounts of fuel and operated inefficiently. Then came one of history's most important engineering improvements. In the 1760s and 1770s, James Watt refined the steam engine by introducing a separate condenser and other innovations that dramatically improved efficiency. Watt did not invent the steam engine from nothing. He transformed an existing technology into a practical source of industrial power. That distinction matters. Many great technological revolutions emerge not from entirely new inventions, but from improvements that make earlier ideas economically viable. Suddenly, power no longer depended solely on rivers or wind. Factories could be built where it made economic sense rather than where nature provided energy. Human civilization had discovered how to convert fossil fuels into mechanical work on an unprecedented scale. Textiles became the first major industry transformed by mechanization. For centuries, cloth production required numerous labor-intensive stages. Spinning thread often took far longer than weaving fabric. This imbalance created constant bottlenecks. Inventors responded with a series of innovations. The flying shuttle increased weaving speed. The spinning jenny allowed one worker to spin multiple threads simultaneously. The water frame introduced water-powered spinning. Samuel Crompton's spinning mule combined earlier inventions into an even more effective machine. Eventually, Edmund Cartwright's power loom mechanized weaving itself. Each invention solved one problem while creating demand for further improvements elsewhere in the production process. This chain reaction became one of the defining characteristics of industrialization. Innovation generated more innovation. The result was astonishing. Textile production increased dramatically while manufacturing costs fell. Clothing that had once been expensive became increasingly affordable for ordinary people. Mass production had begun. Factories represented something fundamentally different from earlier workshops. Before industrialization, many artisans worked from their homes or in small local businesses. Production remained decentralized. Factories concentrated workers, machines, raw materials, and management under one roof. This created economies of scale. Machines operated continuously. Supervisors coordinated production. Standardized processes improved efficiency. Output expanded beyond anything traditional workshops could achieve. But factories also transformed daily life. Time itself became more disciplined. Instead of working according to seasons or daylight, workers increasingly followed factory schedules regulated by clocks. Industrial society demanded punctuality. Work became synchronized in ways that had rarely existed before. The factory was not merely a building, it was a new way of organizing human activity. Coal powered this transformation. Often called the fuel of the Industrial Revolution, coal contained enormous amounts of stored solar energy accumulated over millions of years. Steam engines converted that energy into mechanical force. Iron production expanded. Railways spread. Ships became more powerful. Factories multiplied. As demand for coal increased, mining expanded further. More coal powered more machines. More machines extracted more coal. The Industrial Revolution became a self-reinforcing cycle of energy, production, and economic growth. This marked one of history's greatest shifts. For thousands of years, economic growth had been constrained primarily by biological energy. Now, civilization increasingly relied on geological energy. Humanity began drawing upon fuel reserves created hundreds of millions of years before our species even existed. Transportation soon experienced its own revolution. Steam locomotives transformed overland travel. Railways connected cities, mines, factories, and ports with unprecedented speed.
Travel that once required days by horse could now take hours. Freight costs declined. Markets expanded. Fresh food reached distant populations. Industrial regions became more integrated. At sea, steam-powered ships gradually supplemented and later replaced the exclusive dependence on wind. Global commerce accelerated. Industrialization did not merely increase production, it compressed space and time. Distance became less economically significant. This change reshaped national economies and international trade. Urbanization followed. Factories required workers. Workers moved from rural villages into rapidly growing industrial cities. London, Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, and many other cities expanded dramatically. Urban populations surged across Europe and later North America. Cities became centers of manufacturing, finance, education, innovation, and political influence. But rapid growth created serious challenges. Housing shortages emerged. Sanitation often proved inadequate. Air pollution darkened industrial skies. Working conditions in many factories were harsh. Child labor remained common during the early stages of industrialization. Industrial progress produced extraordinary wealth. It also exposed profound social inequalities. Technological advancement alone did not guarantee better living conditions. Societies had to learn how to manage the consequences of rapid economic transformation. Industrialization did not remain confined to Britain. Belgium industrialized early on the European continent. France followed. Germany combined industrial growth with scientific research to become one of the world's leading manufacturing powers during the 19th century. The United States adopted and expanded industrial techniques on an enormous scale, eventually becoming the world's largest industrial economy. Japan achieved one of history's fastest industrial transformations during the Meiji Restoration, selectively adopting Western technology while preserving much of its own political and cultural identity. Other regions industrialized more gradually, often under very different political and economic circumstances. By the end of the 19th century, industrialization had become a global process. The balance of world power was beginning to shift. Nations that mastered industrial production increasingly dominated international trade, military technology, and geopolitical influence. The Industrial Revolution was no longer simply changing economies, it was changing the international system itself.
The Industrial Revolution is often remembered for its inventions, but its deepest significance lies elsewhere. It fundamentally changed the relationship between humanity, energy, and productivity. For thousands of years, economic output was closely tied to the number of people available to work and the amount of land available to farm. If a society wanted to produce more food, more clothing, or more goods, it usually needed either more labor or more fertile land. Growth was constrained by biology. The Industrial Revolution broke that relationship. Machines multiplied the productive power of every worker. Steam engines converted fossil fuels into mechanical energy on a scale no human or animal could match. Instead of relying primarily on muscles, civilization increasingly relied on stored energy from coal and later oil and natural gas. This shift created what many economic historians call sustained modern economic growth. For perhaps the first time in history, economies could expand continuously over long periods rather than experiencing brief bursts of prosperity followed by stagnation. The consequences reached far beyond factories. Higher productivity lowered the cost of manufactured goods. Cheaper goods expanded consumer markets. Growing markets encouraged further investment. Investment financed more innovation. Innovation increased productivity once again. The Industrial Revolution became a self-reinforcing cycle of technological and economic change. Innovation itself also changed. Before industrialization, many inventions emerged from isolated craftsmen solving local problems. During the 19th century, innovation became increasingly institutionalized. Businesses established engineering departments. Governments funded infrastructure. Universities collaborated with industry. Patent systems rewarded inventors by protecting intellectual property. Scientific discoveries increasingly moved from laboratories into commercial production. Knowledge became an economic resource. This transformation laid the foundation for modern research and development, the system that continues to produce everything from antibiotics to artificial intelligence today. Industrialization also transformed labor. For much of history, work was organized around households, farms, guilds, and small workshops. Factories introduced specialization on a different scale. Instead of producing a complete product, workers often performed one highly specific task repeatedly. This division of labor dramatically increased efficiency. Economist Adam Smith famously illustrated this principle through the example of a pin factory, where specialized workers collectively produced far more pins than individuals working independently. While specialization increased productivity, it also changed the human experience of work. Many workers gained more stable wages but lost much of the autonomy that artisans had once enjoyed. The Industrial Revolution created both unprecedented opportunities and new social tensions. The revolution also reshaped political institutions. Industrial economies required roads, canals, railways, ports, banks, insurance companies, legal systems, standardized currencies, and expanding education. Governments became increasingly involved in regulating commerce, building infrastructure, and eventually addressing labor conditions. As industrial cities grew, political influence gradually shifted away from purely agricultural elites towards merchants, industrialists, financiers, engineers, and an expanding middle class. Many democratic reforms during the 19th century occurred alongside industrialization, though the relationship was neither simple nor universal. Economic transformation often generated political transformation. Military power changed as well. Industrial societies could manufacture weapons, uniforms, railroads, ships, and ammunition on scales that pre-industrial states simply could not match. Railways allowed armies to mobilize rapidly. Steam-powered navies projected power across oceans. Mass-produced rifles improved battlefield effectiveness. Industrial steel enabled stronger warships, bridges, and artillery. Later innovations, including machine guns, internal combustion engines, aircraft, and tanks, were all built upon industrial foundations established during the 18th and 19th centuries. Military strength increasingly depended not only on courageous soldiers, but also on industrial capacity. Wars became contests between factories as much as between armies. Perhaps the most profound transformation was psychological. Industrial society encouraged people to believe that tomorrow could be fundamentally different from today. For most previous generations, change had been gradual. During the Industrial Revolution, technological breakthroughs arrived within a single lifetime. Railways, telegraphs, electric lighting, photography, internal combustion engines, telephones. Each innovation reinforced the expectation that continuous progress was possible. This belief became deeply embedded in modern culture. Today, rapid technological change feels normal precisely because the Industrial Revolution established that expectation. Historians often compare the Industrial Revolution with two other transformative periods, the Agricultural Revolution and today's Digital Revolution. The Agricultural Revolution allowed humans to settle permanently, produce food surpluses, and build civilizations. Without agriculture, there would have been no cities, government, writing, or organized states. The Industrial Revolution built upon those foundations but multiplied humanity's productive capacity far beyond agricultural limits. Agriculture changed where people lived. Industry changed how they worked. Now, many scholars argue that humanity is experiencing another comparable transformation, the digital revolution. Unlike steam engines, computers do not primarily amplify physical labor, they amplify information. Artificial intelligence, automation, cloud computing, robotics, and advanced telecommunications are changing cognitive work much as industrial machines transformed manual labor centuries ago. Both revolutions share striking similarities. Each introduced technologies that initially disrupted existing jobs while creating entirely new industries. Each demanded new skills. Each widened economic opportunities for some while creating uncertainty for others. Each forced governments, businesses, and societies to adapt to technological change faster than many institutions were prepared for. Yet, there are also important differences. The Industrial Revolution depended heavily on physical infrastructure, factories, railways, mines, ports, and machines. The digital revolution increasingly relies on software, algorithms, semiconductor manufacturing, telecommunications networks, and global data flows. Industrialization accelerated the movement of goods. Digital technology accelerates the movement of information. Both, however, fundamentally reshape the organization of society.
Despite its extraordinary achievements, the Industrial Revolution was neither inevitable nor universally beneficial. Historians continued debating why it began first in Britain. Several explanations compete. Some emphasize abundant coal and geography. Others point to institutions protecting investment and property rights. Some highlight colonial trade networks and global markets. Others stress scientific culture, education, or agricultural productivity. Most contemporary scholars reject simple single-cause explanations. Instead, they argue that industrialization emerged through the interaction of many reinforcing factors. The social consequences also remain subjects of debate. Early industrial workers often endured long hours, dangerous machinery, crowded housing, and poor sanitation. Child labor became widespread in many industries before reforms gradually restricted it. Whether living standards improved immediately remains contested. Evidence suggests that while economic output grew rapidly, improvements in wages, health, and life expectancy were uneven during the early decades of industrialization and varied significantly by region and occupation. Over the longer term, however, industrial economies generally experienced substantial gains in income, education, medical care, nutrition, and life expectancy. The transition was neither smooth nor equally shared. Industrialization also introduced environmental costs that earlier societies had never experienced on such scales. Coal-powered factories released enormous amounts of smoke and pollution. Forests disappeared to support expanding industries. Rivers became contaminated by industrial waste. Most importantly, fossil fuels powered centuries of economic growth while simultaneously increasing greenhouse gas concentrations in Earth's atmosphere. The Industrial Revolution created unprecedented prosperity. It also laid the foundations for many of today's environmental challenges. Understanding this dual legacy is essential. Industrialization cannot be viewed only as triumph or only as tragedy. It was both a remarkable engine of progress and the beginning of new global responsibilities.
Although the first steam engines are now museum pieces, the Industrial Revolution never truly ended. It evolved.
Electricity replaced steam in many industries. Oil supplemented coal. Internal combustion engines transformed transportation. Computers digitized manufacturing. Robotics automated production. Artificial intelligence is beginning to automate increasingly complex decision-making. Every modern technological revolution builds upon industrial foundations established more than 2 centuries ago. Today's global economy still depends on interconnected supply chains, large-scale manufacturing, energy production, financial systems, and transportation networks first shaped during the industrial era. Even geopolitical competition reflects industrial logic. Countries compete over semiconductor manufacturing, battery production, renewable energy technologies, rare earth minerals, advanced robotics, and artificial intelligence because industrial capability remains closely linked to economic strength and national security. The technologies have changed. The underlying principle has not. Those who lead technological revolutions often shape the global balance of power. Climate change has also returned the Industrial Revolution to the center of public debate. Humanity now faces the challenge of maintaining industrial prosperity while reducing dependence on fossil fuels. In many ways, the transition toward renewable energy represents another great industrial transformation, one that may define the 21st century as profoundly as steam defined the 19th. The Industrial Revolution reminds us that technological breakthroughs rarely solve one problem without creating new ones. Progress is not a destination. It is an ongoing process of adaptation. When historians search for the moment the modern world truly began, they often arrive not at the founding of an empire or the outcome of a famous battle, but at the moment humanity learned to harness energy in entirely new ways. The Industrial Revolution changed far more than manufacturing. It changed the pace of history itself. For the first time, continuous technological progress became an expectation rather than an exception. The cities we inhabit, the products we use, the global economy we depend upon, and even the challenges we face, from automation to climate change, are all chapters in a story that began with steam, coal, and a handful of determined inventors, engineers, entrepreneurs, and workers willing to transform old ideas into new realities. The next great revolution may not be powered by steam engines or assembly lines. It may be driven by artificial intelligence, clean energy, biotechnology, or technologies we have yet to imagine. But history suggests one enduring lesson. Every revolution reshapes not only our tools, but our societies, and ultimately ourselves. So the real question is no longer whether another industrial revolution is coming. It is whether we are prepared for the world it will create. If you enjoyed this documentary, share your perspective in the comments below. If you found it valuable, consider liking the video and subscribing for more in-depth documentaries exploring the ideas, events, and innovations that shaped our world.